What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
Anybody who's run around with me for any length of time knows I'm a wordsmith. I love words. And today's guest and I, David, we're talking about our kind of a word for the year. And there is such symmetry between his word for the year and my word for the year. I said, we need to spend some time talking together. He is the founder of an organization called Ruminate, which is a consulting firm specifically in developing the concept around radical growth, which ironically is the name of his new book. So I'm anxious, Dave, to spend some time sharing what you've learned in your journey that I think will impact leaders of all size and all scopes. So welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Mike. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. So we were talking. So you go first. We're talking about word for the year. Tell everyone what's your word for this year.
Yeah, you know what? I started this practice off, with the word potential, and I think it was all the way back in 2017. And every year, I kind of named something that would come along, and then this year, it's really been kind of really focused on transformation and really
Hmm.
driving through that idea because radical growth is really all about transformation. And radical is RADICLE. And most people, when the book first came out, kind of mentioned this, said, "Hey, Dave, I know we're good friends, but I think you misspelled the title." And radical is actually the first stage that a seed takes when it breaks through the shell. So as leaders, we're always planting seeds and new ideas, but sometimes we give up on them because we don't see surface level results. And we know transformation in a lot of cases happens under the surface. So sometimes growth happens and we just can't see it. So we really want to influence transformation in 2025.
Yeah, and I love that. And then when I saw that on your website and looked at your bio, and you and I started talking, I needed to spend time with you because that's my word for the year. As you can see on my wall, it's transform. And of course, the picture of the butterfly has to do with the greatest transformation takes place, a metamorphosis going from caterpillar, which is a squiggly, ugly worm, and it literally melts and its DNA just completely gets reshaped. And what comes out of that is this massive, beautiful flying dragon, I mean,
Yeah.
butterfly, which is nothing like the caterpillar. And so, because of that, there's a difference, isn't there, between change and transformation? And so when you think about that, what do you see as sort of the bridge between the two and where one leads to the other, possibly?
Yeah, I love this question because when I always think when we get a whiteboard, sometimes we'll put change equals growth, and it's interesting because I can always say that you can grow and not change, but you can't grow, or you can change and not grow, but you can't grow and not change. And so what I kind of really decipher from that is that I think intentional growth is about transformation because it's really like you're trying to concentrate energy on doing something different. So it's like the old Jim Rohn saying, if you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done. And so a lot of times it's really that concentrated effort on doing something different to create transformation with intention.
Yeah, I think that's one of the lessons we learned from COVID is that worldwide global shutdown in a lot of aspects is I think that if you ask the people who have metamorphosed, who's transformed, I know you are, I know I have, is that 2020 versus where I am today, there's been a major transformation. I talk about my office went from an office to a studio. I went from the business thriving to literally shutting down to now I have clients from Canada all the way down to South Africa because of this technology. And that didn't come from growth. It came from having to transform the way that I thought, the way I looked at myself, looked at what I did. And so tell us about the concept behind the book, which is it's not growth. I
Yep.
love this thing about radical growth. What's the sort of the core competency that sits inside of that?
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that the radical part we were talking about, that kind of transformation that a seed takes, we just saw so many times in environments that people would try, we call it flavor of the week, and they would give up and they would kind of throw things in and say, hey, it doesn't work. We really wanted to see commitment because in our coaching process, when we're coaching executives or teams, we really want to work on perseverance and focus and commitment and discipline to the process because the seed grows under the surface and establishes roots. So it's growing. So sometimes we just can't see it. So sometimes it might take 90 days to see a result from a new behavior. And I remember actually being with a client and we had such a big impact on their executive team. We had about 7 executives. And the CEO said, you know what you really need to do sometime? They said, you need to really take what you're doing here and package it up. And I kind of took a step back. I kind of thought about it, made a quick little note. And I remember I was always trying to think about, I need to write a book. And what would that book be about? And I got to the point where I've always been in an abundance mentality. So I said, well, I need to package what we do with clients around the world with coaching and share that methodology on asking the right questions, creating self awareness, getting higher degrees of commitment, and put it in a process that anybody can follow. And so that's where radical growth came from, where we packaged it together and we're really able to, put something together that we're really proud of. And, earlier this year, the book came out, and after the first month, we actually got into the bestsellers list, which has been, an incredible accomplishment on our side, which we're really proud of working with our publisher. But radical growth is really just kind of packaging up our coaching process and really showing where transformation can happen in any organization, in any scenario.
Yeah, when you think of coaches, sometimes think of this label we have today, life coaches, and as I laughed after 2020, uh, COVID, when you had such high employment. It's amazing how many displaced people became coaches, hung up their
Yep.
coaching shingle, right? You probably experienced that, right? And the people you come into contact with. Um, but if you stop and think about today's time from a leadership standpoint,
Yeah.
that I think the skill that a leader needs to develop, number one, is being a good storyteller. And the
Hmm.
reason why is that when you tell a story, you're able to get people to picture, number one, the message, but also experience and feel the message and have more clarity. That's what story
Hmm.
does. Second thing that is, I think, equally as important as a leader is the ability to coach. Now, help our listeners and viewers who are watching this is as a leader, what do I need to understand about having a coaching mentality?
Yeah, and we usually use the term coaching culture, but I love coaching mentality, and I like the idea around storytelling because, it's like the emotional side of growth, like with neurocoupling that you see when people are telling a good story and you see people leaning in. Well, we believe the same process should be done with a really good coaching process. People should be walking away from coaching energized, motivated to go into, do something that they've never done and feel committed to the process. And with a have to or a want to mentality versus a have to mentality. So I see leaders that embrace coaching culture really start preparing better for coaching scenarios, both in formal and informal scenarios. So potentially coaching on the fly, but doing it in a way that they're not expecting, hey, the person I'm coaching needs to be, giving 100%. It's a 50-50 scenario. The coach needs to show up prepared and invested. And the person showing up for the coaching needs to also become prepared and leaning in and really being candid with themselves about where they can grow and transform. And I think that's where we saw some of the biggest changes. How does the coach prepare and how does the coachee prepare for that scenario? And how do we build structure around that for transformation?
Yeah, I think it's important for our people to embrace the fact that when you think of the proverbial coach and you think of the image that pops into mind, we think of the locker room talk, right? It's
Yeah.
halftime, team's down, you know, Pat Riley comes in, and gives, the message to the Lakers and gets Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar realigned, and they come out and they fire. All right, that's the locker room talk. Coaching is so much more than that, isn't it?
It totally is. And actually, I love a quote. I think I heard it from John Maxwell is that, motivation will get you going, but discipline will keep you growing. And I think the
Mm.
key with coaching is that not only does it really get you motivated and focused, but it also provides discipline and structure around how you want to be committed to those behaviors. And that's really a key because you've got to be able to systemize to optimize. So coaching is really about trying to build better systems for individuals and teams so they can get consistency with growth. And I think that's one of the key words when we think about growth is that we're not just trying to create a hockey stick growth. but we're trying to create consistent growth. So it's about trying to create, compounding effect with a behavior. So they walk away with a consistent level of execution.
Yeah, and I love that. I love this word consistency, and it's consistency in action and consistency in thought, and
Yeah.
that's where mindset and resilience comes into play, doesn't it?
Agreed. Yeah, and you can't really get to that true level of transformative growth unless you're resilient because we know that the road, isn't smooth along the way. You have to be resilient to go through some of the trials and the tribulations. Because I think on my personal journey, some of the biggest growth that I've ever had has been a byproduct of a challenge or a barrier or an obstacle that I had to work my way through. And I see that with leaders that are, coaching and they're ready to throw the towel in saying, hey, this person can't be coached or, I can't make the breakthrough with them. And it's a matter of unpackaging the areas that they're struggling with that can build better systems for transformation.
Yeah, I love that process of unpacking and figuring out what the system that you have in place that you're trying to work with the person or the team or the project you're working with is you have to be able to look at and find out what are the obstacles and roadblocks so you can get them out of the way to release the energy, the creativity, and the performance of the people. If they had the ability to do it themselves, they wouldn't need you as the leader. And so that's your role is to be able to go in there and to be able to knock and find out what those roadblocks are. And most of the time, the way we find out what the roadblocks are is not to come in, like Dumbledore and Harry Potter or whatever, coming back in and with some magic wand. It's the power of the question. It's the power of the question. And so, why is questioning such an important part of your coaching methodology?
Yeah, I think that in my perspective, coaching is or questioning is really probably one of the most powerful things that has happened in my life because I remember having leaders that were very much like, you need to do this, you need to do that, and you're being kind of prescribed the strategy versus I've had some really incredible leaders like Pablo Bataro, who was kind of early on in my career and really asked the most challenging questions and then gave a lot of space for response. So it was really up to me to own the answer and own the solution instead of really being told what I need to do. I feel like in coaching, when we're asking questions, it really forces a self-awareness and a sense of ownership over the response because when they provide a strategy, it's their strategy, not my strategy. And for me, I've gotten better levels of execution, levels of commitment because the idea comes from them. And it's not always on the first question. It might come on a sequence of questions that gets us there, but it's still their strategy, not mine. That's why every time we sit down with an organization or a team, it's kind of like dumping a puzzle out. And when you dump a puzzle out, half those pieces aren't flipped over. Well, we actually take questions to flip those pieces over because ultimately, when we have all the pieces flipped over, we're able to see where we can start developing the right strategy and start putting the puzzle together. So we work with clients instead of for clients. And I think that's critical when we think about questioning because it really unlocks answers that potentially they may never have been asked before. So we get a lot of times we're like, I've never been asked that question before.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
it forces them to give an answer they've probably never given before. So I always look at questions kind of like a key to a door that's never been opened. And it's interesting when they start unpackaging that, they really start diving into areas that help transform the way they think about the next steps because
Yeah,
they're more ownership on it.
yeah, what you're making me think about is I always heard we were given two ears and one mouth, right? And that's an old axiom. But this is the first time I've thought about this, is that if there's a problem or situation that's going on, if I can get multiple sets of eyes looking on that situation, which means multiple perspectives,
Yeah.
what happens if we're all looking at it from the same perspective? I was talking to a client about this recently. I just got through facilitating a one-day program for a company on building the culture of accountability. And they put the program at the end of the day, and they had me emceeing the program throughout the day. So they did a presentation. I introduced the next person. I drew a tie between it, and I kept bringing the word accountability in. And when it was all over with, at the end of the day, and then after the 2 hour program, the CEO and I were visiting, and it was fascinating because what I commented to I said, I'm very proud of how you handled today because you really didn't say a lot. You let your people speak. And what she brought out was, and I love this. She says, because as soon as I start talking, they stop thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because what happens is, what does she want? Which direction she's going? What's happening? And so it's one of the things we run into is that if we can get our people speaking to, and that's where the power of the question comes into play. Man, God, my gosh, it really increases two things. One is clarity, and it also increases buy-in for the solution, doesn't it?
Agreed. Well, it's interesting. I was on a call the other day, and it reminds me exactly what you're talking about. And we always have an 80-20 rule. Said if you're a really good coach, you should be speaking 20% of the time, and the people you're coaching should be speaking 80% of the time. And I recorded a call that I had done, and it was on Otter, .ai, and it gives you how much each person spoke, and it was exactly 80-20. And I just said, okay, that's where we're supposed to be.
That's
And
the
it
sweet
felt
spot.
good because a good question should open up a big conversation, but the person speaking is the one that's providing the response. And it's up to me to listen to get the next question to build on that. So I feel like it's like building a house. The first question should be really big and broad, establish the foundation, and the next one should kind of build the frame. And we keep kind of going along that way that it really constructs this deep thought process because people are so used to being asked surface level questions and giving surface level responses. And we go beyond that. And so we go deeper enough that people almost are like, okay, that's enough.
Hmm.
But it's to the point that we're willing to go farther because we care enough to be candid and really focus on what matters most with these responses.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility, it's an honor.